My guest on Off Limits, that is the name of my podcast now, Off Limits, is Dinesh D Souza, who is a firebrand and a scholar, a conservative scholar, was at the Hoover Institute and the New American Enterprise, I believe, and has done several documentaries, written a number of books, and is no darling to the left, but certainly has made an impact on the right in this country and elsewhere. He's also well known for taking the fight to universities. I love watching his documentary. I mean, I'm sorry, his fights with students. You know, because a lot of times he'll try to bring some conservative ideology or conservative thought, scholarship to these young impressionable minds, and he gets a lot of pushback. But he stands his ground, and it's a lot of fun to watch. So I watched Police State. That is his new documentary. And I think you can go to policestatefilm.net to get tickets. I recommend it highly. It's a very, very good, it's sort of a siren's call to what could happen and is happening to this country in terms of government overreach and the growth of the state, of the Leviathan that has no accountability and can do pretty much whatever it wants. That's kind of that's why I was really excited to get Dinesh on here, because I wanted to also make sure that I asked him questions that maybe people who were politically aligned, philosophically aligned with him wouldn't ask. I hope I can figure out a way to give him some pushback so this podcast doesn't just become an echo chamber. And I don't want to do a podcast where I feed all of you guys the things you already agree with. I want to talk to people that are very intelligent, but I also want to raise questions maybe you didn't ask yourself, or push back on your foundation and my foundation. You know, I'm 56, and I have a tendency to think I'm right about everything. And I think that's very dangerous. And that's why on this podcast, you know, I try to get people on this podcast that I also disagree with, that that grate me the wrong way, that might get me to look at my political foundations, where I stand, and maybe, I don't know, tweak them a little bit, maybe change my mind a little bit. And if you're not willing to do that, you're going to get dumber and dumber. I really believe that. So I think it's very important to keep people around you and to talk to people that maybe don't agree with you as much, or that you don't agree with as much. Now, this podcast with Dinesh D Souza is probably going to be a little bit more the opposite of that, because there's a lot about what Dinesh talks about that I do agree with. So I'm going to do my best to play devil's advocate, but I always find myself having trouble with that, but I'll do my best. So please enjoy. And in the meantime, little housekeeping, kids, go to bryancallen.com for all my dates, stand-up wise. I'm going to be in Chicago at the Chicago Improv in Schaumburg, Illinois, October 27, 28. I'm not sure if this will come out after or before that. And then I'm at Good Nights in Raleigh, North Carolina, November 7, 8, and 9, I believe. Let me just look really quickly at, yeah, that's just go to bryancallen.com. I've got my dates here, and I'm terrible about that, but I got to start getting better at that. Let's take a look. Let's take a look while I have you, kids. While I have you. Yeah, here we go. And then, so December 9 and 10 and 11, actually, I'm at Good Nights in Raleigh, North Carolina. November 16, 17, 18, I'm at Yuck Yucks in Calgary, Canada. That should be interesting. And then I got December 7, 8, and 9, Helium, Indiana. December 15 and 16, Spokane, Washington. And then December 21, 22, 23, I'm in Naples, Florida at Off the Hook Comedy Club. So come get some at bryancallen.com tickets there. And let's get to Dinesh D Souza. Come on now.
Perfect. All right. Cut this.
Well, let's rock and roll. I've got Dinesh D Souza, a man who you really don't need much of an introduction. What I think is interesting is when I Wikipedia you, how interesting that you're called a conspiracy theorist. And you just can't really win. And what I want to do with this interview, Dinesh, is the problem with this whole situation is I agree I find myself agreeing with a lot of what you say. I've watched a lot of your, you take the fight to the universities. I really enjoyed your latest documentary, Police State. But I think it would be very productive if I push back a little and if I try to get out of my own bias and I try to ask you some questions. I watched 2,000 Mules, and I think that would be way more interesting. Otherwise, we just create an echo chamber and it becomes like Sean Hannity interviewing Trump or something, which I want to avoid. But I think you're somebody who can handle it because you do ask a lot of important questions. You do kind of sort of play devil's advocate in Police State. I think Police State, before we get into that, I think Police State is such a great siren call. I think when you live in the United States, this last beacon of truth and freedom in a lot of ways, I don't think you can ever be too vigilant and too paranoid about losing our freedoms. But let me, before we do this, you have been taken to task by a lot of people who, see, what I think is very important is that we change hearts and minds, especially in the middle. Maybe we can't reach the far left, but maybe we can reach people who are on the fence. And I think that's a worthy, do you ever think about that? What are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts? How optimistic are you? You and I are both of a certain age. We've lived our lives here, but how optimistic are you that you can actually, are you set out? Are you trying to do that? You've been so successful with these movies, with these documentaries. Financially, you've got such an audience. But isn't it your job and my job and everybody's job to try to figure out a way to get more people to see the light?
Absolutely. I think sometimes the people who see me as, fire breathing or whatever are responding to my, my Twitter persona, my ex persona. And I admit that I'm a little unhinged on Twitter. Very often I see it as a kind of rhetorical battle zone and I kind of get into it. But that doesn't mean that is my personality. In fact, my personality is, and you see this on the campus, I'm very respectful of students. I like to listen to them. I ask questions of them. And my approach is much more Socratic. It's much more sort of dialectical. In the movies, it's a little different. I am expository. And so in Police State, I think it's fair to say, and I hope you agree with me, that this is not a film where I raise my voice, I get into sort of a fit of frenzy. Not at all. I'm trying to go through some very important developments in the country, but in a measured way. And I'm also trying to use the technique of show, don't tell. I'm not just telling you that we're moving toward a police state. I'm showing you a lot of the informants, whistleblowers, people who can explain the architecture of how this stuff works. And then I'm also showing you some ordinary people who have felt the hot breath of the police state on their face, or what Orwell calls a boot stamping on a human face. And I'm like, you listen to their story. Sometimes I will cinematically recreate things that they tell me. But we also had a couple of FBI consultants on this movie who were showing us, this is how you do this with clinical accuracy. I wanted to make a film where if you have some law enforcement guys and they watch an FBI raid, they go, you know what? That's exactly how that would have gone down.
Yeah, I thought what was really interesting about you interview these ex-CIA agents. And a couple chilling things. One was that he said, your duty, he was told by his supervisors, your duty is not to the Constitution, it's to the FBI. And I thought that was like, wow. And because what I think you do a good job of, and very fairly, and I agree with you, you show way more than tell. I think what you do a very good job is to show how there becomes this incentive structure within the FBI. If you want to get promoted, figure out a way to attach yourself to September 6th.
January 6th.
January 6th. If you want to get ahead, figure out a way to be involved in this new thing they're calling domestic terrorism. And I thought that was very eye-opening and very alarming. But I want to go back to 2,000 Mules for a second. I watched that. Do you still think, in many ways, that this election in 2020 was tampered with, or do you still have questions? Are you still in a question mode, or have you settled on some some answers here.
Let me say two things. One is I think that because of COVID and a lot of political exploitation of COVID, the Democrats and the left were able to create a very unlevel playing field for the election. And so, for example, you take something like the drop boxes. You notice the drop boxes are heavily concentrated in urban areas, democratic cities. You have giant infusions of cash coming in from people like Mark Zuckerberg in the 20s. So that is the unleveling of the playing field. That's one part of it. That is manifestly true. There's really not a whole lot to argue about. I think that Republicans were disadvantaged in that way in the election. Now, the research in 2000 Mules points in a different direction, which is the way in which these drop boxes were exploited in a different way to put in illegal votes. And it was done through kind of a network of nonprofit left-wing organizations working in concert with these so-called mules. The mules are kind of the delivery boys. Now, the problem with the film is that it can go pretty far, but it doesn't have the ability, because it doesn't have the kind of research tools or even the investigative tools open to the cops and to the FBI to kind of follow it through to the final step of being able to say, aha, I now have a legally compelling case. Now, why is that? Well, let's say, for example, I buy this geo-tracking data and I'm able to show you that you've got a very odd phenomenon, which is you've got people who are following a kind of almost like a mailman's route, going from one Dropbox to another, to another, to another, to another. And they're doing this only in the period of the election, and they're doing it in the middle of the night. Right? And then you say, well, who are these guys? Give me their names. And I say to you, listen, I don't have their names because what I have is their cell phone IDs. Now, I grant you that it may not even be the guy. If I give my cell phone to my wife and she goes from Dropbox to Dropbox, and obviously she's the person over there, I do have some limited surveillance video, which I'm going to show you in the film. But the essential next step is for law enforcement to be able to say, all right, we have the ability to take a cell phone ID and figure out, oh, that's Dinesh D Souza's phone. Oh, that's Mr. Callen's phone. Let's go talk to him and find out what was he doing going from Dropbox to Drop. Maybe there's a plausible explanation. So I think you see where I'm going with this. I think that I have established more than probable cause in the film that there were shenanigans in the 2020 election, but it would take law enforcement follow-up, which has not occurred, to be able to take the case to the finish line.
But how did you know that it was the mules? How did you get the mules' cell phone data? And wasn't there a whole lot of CCT evidence, or there were millions of minutes that we could have looked at to see if people actually did go to those drop boxes? How come we didn't get a chance to see that?
With regard to the...
That was two questions, sorry.
It is important to realize how much evidence is not available. So there were a number of states, including these swing states that we looked at in the movie, that had no footage at all. If they had the cameras were not turned on, or they had no cameras installed at all. So a lot of our camera footage is coming really just from a couple of places. Now, it's many, many hours of footage, but you can just imagine if you turn on a camera in front of a Dropbox, you have hours and hours where nothing is happening. So the only way to actually know what footage to look at is to go from the cell phone data. Because if the cell phone data tells you that there's a guy, and you don't mean a guy, you mean a phone, that's going from one Dropbox to another, to another, to another, and it so happens that, let's just say on that route, there is one Dropbox that has surveillance video, you can then check by going to the surveillance video, you look at that exact date and time, and sure enough, there you see him on the video. So what happens is you have two independent lines of evidence, but they corroborate each other. Now, unfortunately, that's rare because I would say out of every 10 Dropboxes, there is less than one that has surveillance footage. And this is a violation of the election rules, which call for 24/7 surveillance footage on all Dropboxes. But again, with the pretext of COVID, oh, we didn't get around to it, this was not done in 2020.
So follow me on this, or let me see if I can follow this, because I'm trying to think if there was election fraud and I was a Democratic operative, would the idea be then I would create a bunch of fake ballots with either dead people or just made up names, and then put those ballots in the Dropbox so they could be counted? Is that what the theory, one of the theories could be? And would that work?
Well, it's not quite that simple. It's not just a matter of manufacturing the ballots. There is a prior operation that goes into generating fake ballots. And let's explain what we mean by fake. If I took a look at, let's just say, for example, I'm in Texas and I got a hold of the voter rolls in Texas, which you can certainly do, and you take a look at the voter rolls, these voter rolls are notoriously inaccurate in just about every state. Why? Because we have a system, and I think part of it is deliberate, that even though Americans move all the time, I mean, let's just say that you packed up and moved to another state, every other government agency would know about this very quickly. The DMV would know that you're no longer in this state. Your driver's license is now from another state. The tax people would know the new state is quickly on your back to pay your taxes. So there is a network of information that moves electronically, letting all these agencies know that you're no longer, let's say, in Georgia, you've now moved to Tennessee. The one people who don't know are the election people. And so you were in Georgia and you were on the Georgia rolls. You've now moved to Tennessee and now you're on the Tennessee rolls, but nobody has taken you off the Georgia rolls. And the key point to realize is that there are millions of people on these swollen, out-of-date rolls. So dead people is only one part of the picture. A much bigger group would be, say, college students. My daughter goes to college at Dartmouth. She enrolls in New Hampshire. She's on the voter rolls. Then she moves to New York. She's now on the voter rolls in New York, but no one's taken her off the voter rolls in New Hampshire. So what I'm saying is that cunning people who know how the system works, all you have to do is use the swollen voter rolls that are full of fake people. By fake people, I mean they're not living in the state, they're not eligible to vote in that state, and yet their name is on the roll. If you look them up, oh, they're on the rolls. So my point is, it is not difficult to generate when you have an absentee ballot system. Now, obviously, if you show up to vote and they say, oh, where's your ID? Then there are checks to make sure that this sort of thing can happen. I mean, let me give you a small example to illustrate dramatically what I'm getting at. If I go to vote and there's a curtain and I go behind the curtain and I'm about to cast my vote, but then I come running out and I tell the officials there, hey, listen, you know what? I just realized I've got some important things to do. I cannot complete my vote right now. How about if I take my ballot with me? And I'll drop it off later and I'll come back and give it to you. They would be like, no way. Why? Because you're out of sight. They have no way to keep their eyes on the ballot. And yet when you think of the absentee ballot process, that's exactly what happens. The ballots are mailed out, a bunch of ballots come back, and there is no system of proper checking to make sure that those are valid ballots.
See, this is so far I haven't heard anything conspiratorial. What I've heard is that the current system seems rather antiquated, and you're asking very, very important questions. It seems like we are not far from, because of our biometrics, being able to vote on our phone. Now, that might be a good thing or might be a bad thing. I get really worried nowadays of pure democracy, where everybody can vote from their phone. This is very undemocratic of me, of course, and I believe in democracy, but it does seem like we are eventually going to be able to, with biometrics, vote from our phone and make it way easier. But that sounds probably dangerous to all political parties concerned, because you don't want everybody voting from certain areas, and sometimes making it a little bit more difficult, making it a bit of an effort is probably subconsciously or consciously a way of getting people who really care to take that little extra effort. But
well, I think that both in 2000 Mules and now in Police State, the idea here is to show what's happening and to raise questions about it. That's really what a film can do. And what the film is trying to do is the film can't solve the problem. In fact, very often people come up to me and say, oh, Dinesh, well, what are you doing to stop all this election fraud? And I go, well, what I'm really doing is making a film to highlight problem areas. And then, frankly, I'm doing a handoff to you, because I don't have an organization. I'm not a kind of a lifelong activist. So there are people who need to do those things. And similarly with the police state, I can simply describe to you a dramatically changed America from the one that I came to as an exchange student in my teenage years. In the America of the 80s and 90s, I was able to say we have a Bill of Rights. We have a right to free speech, a right to conscience or religious freedom. We have a right to assemble, to petition the government, equal rights and equal justice under the law. And if you ask me today, it seems that none of those rights are completely secure. The pretext of going after the rights may vary. Oh, you can't go to church because of COVID. Oh, we have to ban you, Dinesh, from social media because you're making claims about election fraud. And after January 6th, we can't tolerate those. So the reasons given might be different, but the trend is in the same direction. It is towards a reduction, a subtraction, a jeopardizing of our basic rights.
And you know, it sneaks up on you. When I was watching Police State, I thought to myself, there were these sort of chilling sort of images of Stalin's Russia and Mao's China, and you know, and these different things. And you know, people say, well, we could never be China, we could never be Russia. Well, guess what? They said that too. I promise you, a lot of them said that too. You don't realize how quickly your freedoms get taken away, or should I say, how gradually your freedoms are eroded. We are always under surveillance. There was nothing about Police State that I didn't agree with. You know, I was trying to find things. We were going to interview, and I was like, let me see if I can figure out a way to kind of push back on this. But everything you talk about, the Patriot Act, let's just talk about that. The fact that we are always on camera, no matter where we are now. My dashboard camera on my Tesla, Ring cameras, traffic cams. I was talking to, I had Sammy the Bull Gravano, who ran the Gambino crime family. I said, and this is probably a good part of it, of course. I said, you guys couldn't operate. And he goes, we couldn't do a thing. I couldn't get this, I couldn't do a thing. I'd have to yell at you. The minute I tried to, you know, move on you or plan a hit, you'd have 5 grandmothers with their phones out and we'd all be in jail. That's the good thing. But obviously, we have lost our privacy, and it doesn't seem like any of us are sounding the alarm. I mean, with the exception of yourself. I feel like there's this tiny group of people, you know, and I kind of know everybody in that group, and that's a problem. But why is it that this isn't more alarming? I mean, and I don't even know what we would do about it at this point. I mean, not only do we have cameras everywhere, but it seems to me these government agencies are trying to bring all these cameras into one central hub so they can have one big brother camera. That is happening now. We have that technology. And all of us are going, it's fine. Well, I don't know.
I mean, it would be bad enough to have this kind of comprehensive surveillance. That's bad enough. But the other thing that's happened in conjunction with it, which makes it a lot worse, in my opinion, is the breakdown of the safeguards that were in place before against how this surveillance can be abused. And you mentioned the Patriot Act and 9/11. See, I think, interestingly, the police state in America has a bipartisan origin. It's being used mainly by the left today, but it was constructed with a lot of Republican and conservative and neoconservative help. Why? Yes. Because after 9/11, a lot of people said, and me included, that, hey, guess what? You know, we need to stop these things in advance. That means we've got to give enhanced surveillance powers to these police agencies or government. Now, we thought that we were granting this power to the government to focus on foreign terrorists who were trying to kill us, right? People like the Hamas guys who launched the Hamas attack. But little did we know that over time, you can have malefactors in the government who go, guess what? We now have the power pretty much to be able to easily get a warrant and surveil anybody. And if we identify someone, there's such a massive accordion book of statutes, we can find something to get them on. So this is an incredible weapon that we can now use against our political opponents. So ironically, something that was set up, well-intentioned, with a lot of, I think, public support, has now been deployed in a very nefarious way, and our police state danger comes out of that.
Yeah, it was really hard not to be mad at the upper echelon of the FBI. You know, the only thing I could say is maybe the powers that be, because a lot of the people in the FBI are patriotic and conservative. So are people in the CIA. Most of them believe strongly in the Constitution. They're patriotic. They're very conservative. At least not only from my experience, but from the people I've talked to that were really spent a lot of time in those institutions. And the FBI especially was an institution in many ways with such a flawless reputation. We really believe in the FBI. We still do. That they are the ones who, it's kind of like the Supreme Court. We expect them to be as buttoned down as they are, as conservative as they are, because we can rely that they are going to always go by the book. But I don't know if Trump's legacy is going to be maybe 10, 20, 30 years from now, and I hope not, that the reaction to him, the overreaction to what he was considered a clear and present danger, not just to the left, but to many on the right. And so they took these shortcuts, just like we did when, Bush said, what are you going to do? What are you going to do to stop this from happening again? That was the task given to the FBI and to the CIA, but especially the FBI. And they had to figure out a way to make sure there wasn't a mushroom cloud over over an American or European city. And at that point, I think, and I was included in this too, Dinesh, I was like, we got to do whatever we got to do. And the Patriot Act sounded like a great idea. So we really do have to be very careful about how we react to these dangers. And you do a beautiful job of describing in the documentary the Reichstag. The fire in the Reichstag was started by some communist in Hitler's Germany. It was a terrorist act, if you will. And that's what the Nazis and Hitler used to suspend all constitutional rights. And you can see this happening over and over again. And I think, again, what I really liked about the documentary was you realize that we are a lot closer to a police state than any of us thought. And I think you did an amazing job. I mean, you did. You kind of were just a guy asking questions. You talked to moms. You talked to these moms who were literally saying, I don't want my kids wearing masks, or I have questions here. These are housewives, and the FBI comes to their house with a battering ram, with a bunch of dudes. I got so mad at that. I can't believe I live in this country. I can't believe they would do that. Now, I haven't talked to any FBI guys. Maybe they haven't. Maybe they'd say, look, this is what we had to do, and this is a very rare case, but come on now.
Well, you know what I think it is? Part of the way that police states work is that they take tasks that would normally be very distasteful to do, but they define them in narrow and operational and even bureaucratic terms. And that makes people willing to do them because they feel that they're not the ones who are making a moral judgment. They are just part of a larger system in which somebody else is going to make that call. I remember watching an interview with a guy who was brought in as the FBI sniper at Waco. This guy was, I think he was called a hostage negotiator, but basically he was a killer. His job is to shoot the bad guys. And somebody asked him the question, like, before you went in, like, did you know who David Koresh was? Did you know anything about the Branch Davidians and all these guys? And he goes, no, never heard of them. I didn't know who they were. And they're like, you're willing to go in there with your long rifle and kill some guy that you don't even know? You don't even know what he did? And the guy goes, I don't know what he did. He goes, basically, this is my job. When negotiations break down with the US government, they bring me in and they go, there's a bad guy, kill him. And I come in. And so this guy was a normal guy, a decent guy, even a likable guy. I'm sure he has a good family. And his point was that there are other people there are courts, there's a system that determines guilt and innocence and so on. My job is to be defined operationally. And so I think that's what happens with these FBI guys, because what would make a decent guy go into an apartment, find some 70-year-old grandmother, like grab her by the hair and pull her to the ground, twist her arms behind her back, put her in handcuffs, pull her down the stairs if she resists, pull her into the street where her neighbors come and gawk on her. I mean, how can you get a decent guy to do something so indecent? Well, the answer is you tell him, listen, we have to conduct our raid at 6 a.m. because we need to have an element of surprise. That's actually for the safety of the person we're arresting. You're doing them a favor by smashing into their house this way, because that way they don't come to the door with a gun. So my point is that the FBI's laid out this bureaucratic procedure, and then all these guys go, okay, well, I want to be a good FBI agent. I want to learn what it means to make a decent arrest. I want to be in with the group. I want to get a promotion. I want to get a bonus. I want to retire with a pension. So all of those normal human motives are then mobilized by bad people to get good people to do bad things.
Yeah, that's you couldn't have put it better. That is the sort of faceless, heartless just nature of bureaucracy. There really is an accountability. You can't even blame the tactical guys. The tactical guys get ready for this stuff. That's what they do. That's kind of where the excitement is. That's why you do it,
They're like soldiers who are told, take that fort or go up that hill. And the soldier's job is not to say, well, why are you asking me to go up that hill? Why am I killing that guy? What did he, No, your job is defined bureaucratically and operationally, and your job is just to carry it out.
Guys, if you like this episode, all you got to do is click this link somewhere over here, and it'll take you over to Mug Club, where you can watch the rest of the episode. You can also watch a bunch of other content, namely Louder with Crowder, Steven Crowder.